The London mansion that Queen vocalist Freddie Mercury once called home is up for sale. The Kensington mansion, which was constructed in 1907, has a library, a bar, and the world grieved the loss of Freddie Mercury, one of the most electrifying voices in rock music, when he died in 1991. His closest friends, however, were confronted with something far more personal and shocking while millions lamented the loss of the Queen frontman they had loved on stage. Everything he had stashed up in Garden Lodge, his London residence. Hidden behind high brick walls in Kensington, the estate served as more than just Freddie's residence. It was his haven, his little universe. Even people who knew him well were shocked by what was found within when the doors were opened after his death. From Zanzibar to stardom. Born Farrokh Bulsara on September 5, 1946, in Stonetown, Zanzibar, during the island's time under British occupation, Freddie Mercury was known to the world long before he became famous. His Parsi parents, Jair and Bomi, have ancestry in the city of Bulsar in western India. Is recognized in Gujarat as Valsad. Even though their paths crossed continents, they remain steadfast in their Zoroastrian beliefs and practices. Zanzibar was the new workplace for the Bulsara family. The entrance of Bomi's son's eccentricities and talents disrupted their family life, even though Bomi worked as a cashier at the British Colonial Office. The fact that Freddie was born with 4 additional incisors is something most people would find strange, but for Freddie, it was the key to his incredible vocal range. His jaw seemed to have been molded by the forces of nature so that he could sing. Freddie spent the majority of his childhood in India, even though Zanzibar was his home. He began studying the piano while living with family at the tender age of 7. St. Peter's, a residential school in Bombay that follows a British model, was his destination a year later. There he initially began to blossom. Stamp collecting was his day job. Among his few personal belongings, this fascination is currently housed in London's Postal Museum, having been passed down from his father. But after the sun went down, rock and roll took over his universe. With an audacity that made him stand out, he assembled a school band named the Hectics when he was 12 years old, and they blasted out Elvis, Cliff Richard, and Little Richard versions. Those who knew him back then recall his uncanny knack for hearing a song on the radio and then playing it backwards on the piano. During his time at St. Peter's, Farrokh Bulsara adopted the name Freddie. The moniker stayed, his musical interests expanded, and he and his parents were back in Zanzibar by 1963. It was the worst possible time, and the island was a total mess. A bloody rebellion against the Arab-led administration of the Sultan of Zanzibar broke out in 1964, known as the Zanzibar Revolution. As a result of the massacre of thousands of Arabs and Indians, the Bulsaras were forced to abandon their homeland. Far from the sunny shores where Freddie spent his infancy, their flight brought them to the grey expanse of Feltham Middlesex in England. Before settling into a modest house on Gladstone Avenue, they stayed in Hamilton Close, then moved to Hamilton Road for a short while. A real turning point came when England was involved. Freddie earned a diploma in graphic design from Ealing Art College in 1969 after completing his art studies at Isleworth Polytechnic. His later work on the now iconic Queen crest is a direct result of the same design abilities. However, hustling and odd jobs were necessities in those early days. At Heathrow Airport, he was a luggage handler, silently transporting dreams that weighed more than the bags themselves. By his side, his new friend Roger Taylor, a drummer, peddled scarves and vintage Edwardian clothing. Even though Freddie would become famous as a vocalist, Taylor thought he wasn't quite there yet. He was merely my wild companion. That one man who could always find the best party. As his flamboyance started to fade, Freddie was remembered by many around him as introverted and reserved, someone who preferred music to talk. However, everything changed the moment he took the stage. He was the lead singer for the Hendrix-influenced blues band Ibex, later rechristened Wreckage, which he formed in Liverpool in 1969. For a while, he even made his home above a Penny Lane pub. Living it up in the heart of Liverpool's music scene. He attempted again with a different group, Sour Milk Sea, when Wreckage failed. But even that had fallen apart by the beginning of 1970. This would have appeared to be a series of setbacks to someone looking from the outside. Freddie saw it as practice. Every step, every setback, and every rejection was preparing him for the time when he would finally step into his role. How a rock icon rose to fame. Freddie Mercury had evolved from the timid art student peddling scarves at Kensington Market in 1970. That spring, he became the lead singer for Smile, a band that also included Roger Taylor on drums and Brian May on guitar. The lineup was finalized a year later with the addition of bassist John Deacon, and the band that would go on to dominate the globe was created. However, Freddie was determined not to accept a generic name. He advocated for Queen, although everyone else was hesitant. The word was strong, assertive, and yes, intentionally provocative in his view. Its regal, majestic, powerful, and global tone, he once said, was his intention. The campiness was only a small part of the appeal, though, which he was fully cognizant of. At about this time, he formally changed his name from Bulsara to Mercury, an identity more fitting for his destined role in the universe. He had already begun to mold the group's character before their music took off. A magical coat of arms that combined the band's astrological signs, the Queen crest, was created by Freddie just before the release of their debut album. Deacon and Taylor get lions, May gets a crab, and the Virgo himself gets two fairies. As the enormous Q rose beneath the flaming phoenix's wings, a crown shimmered within. Almost regal in appearance, it befitted a band that would lord over stages like rock kings. The baritone range was where Freddie's voice naturally fell when he spoke. Although he ventured into soaring tenor territory with his singing, which gave Queen a vocal edge that few bands could match. When it came to penning songs, he was a free spirit who dared to be unpredictable. Bohemian Rhapsody, Somebody to Love, We Are the Champions, Don't Stop Me Now, and many more of Queen's greatest hits feature his distinctive fingerprints. For Freddie, recurrence was the devil, so each one sounded alien. He came clean about his love of change, finding motivation in whatever piqued his interest in the realms of theater, film, and music. Like Bohemian Rhapsody and the grandiose tunes from Queen 2, several of his songs were mazes of shifting keys and chaotic arrangements. Some, such as Crazy Little Thing Called Love, included only a few chords. The equilibrium was what really set it apart. Freddie possessed an irresistible magnetic quality that could be both amusing and tragic at the same time. Sitting down at the keyboard and letting his ideas flow was his method of composition, even though he frequently admitted he could hardly read music. The records weren't the only thing that made him unique, though. That was the platform. It was the live performance that Freddie Mercury loved. With a theatricality that was equal parts shocking, charming, and teasing, he controlled any stage, be it a theater or a stadium. Observers of him could not help but notice that he was unique. In an interview, David Bowie said that Freddie didn't merely become a theatrical rock performer, he pushed it to the limit. The late Brian May claimed that Freddie could enchant everyone in the stadium, even the farthest back row. On July 13, 1985, at Live Aid, that force reached its zenith. Queen was the showstopper at Wembley Stadium in the first half of the concert. With 72,000 fans clapping in time, Freddie, clad in jeans and a white tank top, created an a cappella note that went viral and became recognized all over the globe. After all these years, reviewers still consider it the pinnacle of rock live performances. It was more than just a concert for those lucky enough to be there. It was a spiritual awakening. At Bequeathed Park in August 1986, he took his last bow with Queen. God Save the Queen was Freddie's encore, and nearly 200,000 people were there to watch. Adorned with a golden crown and a royal robe. He had subtly informed Brian May a week prior that he likely wouldn't be continuing with this for much longer. Just as the lights went down, he cemented his reputation as an iconic performer. He was a raging torrent on stage. When he wasn't performing, he remained a complex paradox. A former piano virtuoso who, in pursuit of greater stage freedom, eventually gave it all together. A composer with the potential to one day make music with complex operatic harmonies. Rockabilly song with only 3 chords the following day. Freddie Mercury proved that there were no limits, only reinventions, by picking up a guitar for songs like Crazy Little Thing Called Love. His personal life, including Freddie's quirky personality and romantic relationships, was as erratic as his music. Freddie Mercury had a series of affairs with women actresses, models, and even famous people, though he was more famous for his affairs with men. Even though he was the center of rock stardom, he kept most of his personal life under wraps. The same was said by those who knew him frequently. Freddie was multifaceted. He commanded arenas like a deity when he performed, looking like a peacock adorned in sequins and leather. He might be reserved, evasive, and even guarded when he's not performing. However, he continued living as though time were chasing him until darkness fell. In his life, he was fearless, brash, and quick. During his prime, Queen was known for throwing legendary wild parties. No jazz CD from 1978's bash at the New Orleans Fairmont Hotel is more notorious than this one. Envision it. There are dwarfs aimlessly walking around with silver platters of cocaine strapped on their heads, nude waiters balancing trays, and stripped-down wrestlers in a jacuzzi. Live hands had their heads severed by a performer. That night, excess and rock and roll donned a mustache. It was a very different world from the Freddie's Spartan upbringing in India and the peaceful London existence he began at the tender age of 8. However, moderation was never an option for him after he experienced celebrity. He persisted in his relentless pursuits even after the onset of HIV/AIDS. He celebrated his 41st birthday with one of the wildest evenings in Ibiza, months after receiving his diagnosis. An enormous party with 700 people, 350 champagne bottles, and pyrotechnics. Even in Majorca, they illuminated the sky. By daybreak, the 232 broken glasses had made it onto the invoice. Even the royal family wanted in on Freddie's star by the mid-1980s. Outside of their inner circle, his bond with Diana was well-kept secret. He took her into London's Royal Vauxhall Tavern, a gay pub, one night while she was disguised in a coat, hat, and sunglasses so she might escape the world's scrutiny. Even if just for a little while. Others, like Michael Jackson, became icons in his eyes as well. In 1983, they attempted to record a song together, but their eccentricities prevented it. Freddie was really unhappy about having to work with a llama in the studio, and he vented his frustrations over the phone. In contrast, Jackson once stopped a session when he saw Freddie inhaling cocaine through a $100 note. Nothing more than anecdotes remained once their chemistry faded. Even though everyone else was wondering about Freddie, he kept quiet about it. Even his parents were in the dark about his true identity. Some even thought he had admitted it in Bohemian Rhapsody, where the enigmatic lyrics hinted at his inner struggles. In his inner life, nevertheless, women continued to play an integral role in his narrative. Mary Austin was his first and foremost love. In 1969, he crossed paths with her at Biba, a trendy clothing boutique. At the age of 24, Freddie was pimping clothing for a living alongside drummer Roger Taylor at a market booth. Mary had just turned 19. Rock solid, middle class, and reliable. Mary took care of the bills for years as Freddie pursued a goal that nobody else could see, and they fell head over heels for each other. They eventually moved into a modest apartment together. Freddie proposed when his moment had finally come. The engagement fell through when he confessed his desire to men, but Mary was too startled to comprehend what was happening. Working for his management, going on tours with him, and being by his side till he passed away were all things Mary remembers telling him directly. The Garden Lodge at Kensington Mansion and half of Freddie's riches were bequeathed to her by him after he declared her his common-law wife. Even now, she keeps close guard on the fact that she became the caretaker of his remains. Subsequently, the fiery Austrian actress Barbara Valentin arrived, who matched Freddie's vivacity with her own. While he was in Munich, he had a passionate love affair with Winfried Winnie Kirkberg, a proud German restaurateur who presented him with a wedding band. His soulmate, nevertheless, was the Irish hairstylist Jim Hutton. Freddie referred to him as his husband, lived in Ireland with him, and wore the gold band Jim gave him until his death. Throughout his final 7 years of life, Jim was by his side as he battled illness and decline. Even when Freddie wasn't in love, his obsessions were intense. He cared for his kiddies like they were his own children. To the point where he would make phone calls home while on tour and someone would simply put the receiver to their furry ears. Delilah, his favorite, was even immortalized in a song. His Kensington home was filled to the brim with antiques and works of Japanese art, which he had acquired with the same fervor he had for his music. That fervor frequently burst into violent confrontations in the studio. He made a joke once about how Queen and the oxygen they breathe are always arguing. The friction, nevertheless, was the key that unlocked masterpieces that continue to tremble arenas to this day. Although his soul remained unshaken, AIDS had weakened his body by the end. Freddie waited until the day before he passed away in 1991 to officially acknowledge his sickness. His death the following day at the age of 45 shocked the entire world. He defied summarization. Far too large, too conflicting, too dynamic. Perhaps Brian May, another member of his band, did a better job. One who sings songs and loves life is Freddie Mercury. In the span of a single day, Freddie might be unabashedly sensitive and in the next, explosively violent. Even while he loved his art, his music, and his cats with all his heart, not every relationship he had was based on dedication. There were several that came with strings attached, and there was one that would inflict deeper cuts than the rest. A Paul Prenter betrayal, loyalty for sale. As early as the mid-1970s, Freddie Mercury had all the makings of a legendary rock star. However, unseen to the public eye, Freddie was subtly influenced by a guy named Paul Prenter, who would later betray him in ways that are still a topic of controversy. Conventional wisdom holds that Mercury and Prenter crossed paths in a bar in 1975. Prenter formally took over as his manager 2 years down the road. It wasn't long before rumors started circulating that their relationship went beyond a professional one. Some said they were romantically involved, but Prenter's brothers would deny the accusation and call it rumor. Something seemed to be working for a while. Many saw the first 5 years of their collaboration as stable, even fruitful. But by 1982, weaknesses started to emerge. As a radical departure from their typical rock songs, Queen unveiled Hot Space, an album saturated with disco and funk influences. Brian May and Roger Taylor despised Mercury's experimental sound, which Freddie was embracing, and they held Prenter responsible for steering the band in that way. Album sales were disappointing, tensions rose, and Prenter's relationship with the band members became nearly irreparably damaged. Freddie, though, kept him on staff. Despite the growing tension between him and the band, Prenter continued working for Mercury for a number of additional years. Their love ended, and the consequences were devastating, since even loyalty has its limitations. While working for the Sun, Prenter peddled a destructive narrative. He made Mercury's identity known in it. Let his connection with Jim Hutton go. Everyone closest to Freddie was taken aback by the betrayal. Ray, Paul's brother, claims that the man's animosity stems from feeling abandoned while he was fighting HIV/AIDS. Ray detailed how Paul's years of service to Mercury had left him feeling neglected and unappreciated. It was clear from his speech that he was a guy who had been betrayed, distressed and overwhelmed. Exposed the fact that Paul, who was in dire need of funds for his treatment, had resorted to using the documents as a last resort. Fans of Freddie Mercury saw that treachery as a tragic episode in the singer's life and as a stain on Prenter's legacy. Both Freddie's public persona and the delicate trust he had in others around him were wounded by that episode with Prenter. Following that type of betrayal, he became even more reclusive, guarded, and desperate for alone. Since his health started to deteriorate, only a select handful would ever know the reality of what he was going through. The grand finale. Freddie Mercury was unique in the way he spent his life. Brazen, extravagant, and totally unique. He embodied showmanship to a pristine degree when performing on stage. Clad in dazzling costumes, they rule arenas with ear-rattling voices. But beneath all that flamboyance and color, Freddie constructed a hidden, jealously guarded universe. There were high walls that only a select few were allowed to see, and even fewer who understood the reality about his latter years were able to understand. The Globe had already lost one of its most influential voices by the time November 24, 1991 rolled around. Not only did the news of Freddie Mercury's death shock many, but so did the reality that almost no one outside of his inner circle had any idea. In 1990, at the Brit Awards, Freddie and his Queen bandmates were last seen performing live for the public. Freddie then started to retreat, slipping further into the shadows of his Kensington sanctuary, Garden Lodge. Outside, he only allowed his closest associates, his partner Jim Hutton, his lifelong friend Mary Austin, and his aide Peter Freestone, inside. Not even Queen's other members could deny reality. Freddie avoided bringing up the subject of his illness, even though his bandmates could see he was ailing. For a long time, rumors circulated. Several tabloids, including The Sun, published articles asserting that he had undergone an HIV test as early as 1986. But nothing was ever proven, and Freddie, as usual, had the narrative in his hands right up until the finish. The world didn't hear it from him until November 23, 1991, the day before he passed away. A statement that Freddie had written when he was dying was shared by his publicist, Roxy Meads. He came clean about his status as an AIDS patient and having tested positive for the virus. Freddie stated that he had decided to keep this secret so that his loved ones may remain private. The moment had arrived, nevertheless, for his followers to learn the reality. In their battle against the sickness, he asked everyone to join him, his physicians, and the global community. After 24 hours, Freddie Mercury had disappeared. He was in his early 40s. Both his identity and the timing of his statements made an impact. The terrible shadow of AIDS was cast in the early 1990s. Anyone linked to it was stigmatized, and there was no way to cure it. Freddie was shockingly and defiantly courageous for publicly claiming his truth despite that dread. The remaining members of Queen later acknowledged that they were aware Freddie was ill, but they refrained from pressuring him about it. As if it were an unwritten pact, Brian May reflected on how they avoided talking about the problem. Floyd informed them he was unable to go on tour. And that was the extent of his candor. Nothing was uttered aloud, but as time passed, the truth became apparent. In 1989, during a dinner in Montreux, Freddie finally told his closest associates about it. Despite their prior guesses, the confirmation nonetheless hit them hard. Thinking back on Freddie's fears, Brian realized that he was worried his life would become a circus if the truth got out. He was not interested in being treated with pity or made to look like a victim. Up until the end, his one wish was to continue composing music, or business as usual, as he phrased it. Jim Hutton supported him unconditionally. The two had first crossed paths in a nightclub in 1985, and their passionate love continued unabated till Freddie took his last breath. In their off-the-grid existence at Garden Lodge, the couple wore wedding bands as a symbol of their devotion to one another. Their relationship was private and between them and no one else, as Jim would later clarify. Should have remained undisclosed. After Freddie Mercury's body succumbed to bronchial pneumonia caused by AIDS complications, he took his last bow at Garden Lodge on November 24, 1991. After another protracted battle with lung cancer, Jim Hutton died in 2010 at the age of 60, nearly 20 years after the first. Although Freddie was the subject of public scrutiny his entire life, he ultimately decided to end it on his own terms. In those final days, he demonstrated once again that he could still pull off the ultimate bow, even without the glitter, lights, and adoring fans. The contents of Freddie Mercury's London residence astounded even his closest associates. The Globe wept for Freddie Mercury when he died in 1991 at his cherished garden cottage. Something very different, though, was what he left behind within Kensington's lofty walls. A house that seemed more like an extension of his spirit than a mere structure. It was Freddie's eccentricity, taste, and brilliance preserved in a time capsule that remained undisturbed for 30 years. What was inside shocked onlookers just as much as it had the man when he first laid eyes on it. Freddie spent £500,000 in 1980, when Queen was at the top of her stardom, on the Georgian-style property at 1 Logan Place that would become his hideaway. Friends called it Garden Lodge. The address was more than that. In the shadow of the now famous Green Door, Freddie constructed a sanctuary that reflected his every paradox. Elegant yet personal, boisterous yet serene, with a touch of Victorian style and a touch of Japanese tranquility. Mary Austin, who had been Freddie's fiancée and trusted confidant, recalled the exact moment they entered that verdant building. As soon as she stepped foot in the house, she knew it was an artist's retreat. Freddie, however, was flamboyant in every way. There was no place like his mirrored dressing room, where he would put on his white sneakers, trim his mustache, and become the unbeatable performer who captivated audiences across the world. The walls were a vibrant saffron yellow, Freddie's favorite color, as soon as you stepped through the entrance. It was deliberate. The same dazzling charisma he displayed on stage emanated from it. Bohemian Rhapsody was born on the piano that he owned in the dizzyingly tall 2-story drawing room. The showman's bedroom, accessible via the mirrored dressing room on the upper floor, was his last refuge. Mary meticulously maintained the house for many years, in the exact same condition that Freddie had left it, as if he would return at any second, take up his piano, and begin to compose once more. Equally remarkable were the gardens. Freddie designed them in a Japanese style and personally oversaw their manufacture. Mild pink blossoms adorned the magnolia trees. The sculpted topiary and water elements created an ethereal atmosphere that pervaded the entire room. There is almost magical outdoor space in Kensington, but Freddie had carved out his own Eden there. The bar where he hosted his closest friends and his music area both had views of the garden. His presence is practically palpable. Gazing out into the blooms, he sat with a robe across his shoulders and a drink in his hand, his head filled with poetry and melodies. However, Garden Lodge served as more than just a residence. It was Freddie's safe haven for his valuables. Mary began the process of selling the house by selling more than 1,500 of his belongings through Sotheby's. The money she made went towards AIDS charity. Included in the collection were mementos such as the velvet robe worn by Street Edward on his 1986 Magic Tour and an iconic replica of his crown. With a mischievous grin, Freddie had slipped into both, playfully acknowledging his status as the self-proclaimed king of rock. Among his most famous photos are the ones where he stands with his arms outstretched and his crown shining in the spotlight. Spectators got a better look. Decades worth of cherished possessions from Garden Lodge, including handwritten song lyrics, extravagant stage costumes, and more. The verdant garden entrance, though, was the most startling feature. Over the years, countless strangers who felt a connection to him have scrawled tributes, love letters, confessions, and thank you notes. Its incredible £412,750 auction price was almost equal to what Freddie had spent for the entire house in 1980. The home's worth had risen to more than £30 million by the time it was listed in 2024. Living in the mansion had been wonderful, Mary confessed. Filled to the brim with thoughts of joy, harmony, and serenity. She wished that the next person to enter the verdant door would experience the same feelings that she and Freddie had, that it was more than a home, it was a haven for love and imagination. Garden Lodge was not built to be forgotten. It was designed, constructed, and inhabited with the same symphony that Freddie Mercury embodied. It embodied his music in all its ageless, daring tenderness. Its allure will last for decades, much like the guy himself. A lasting testament to the fact that Freddie's enchantment extended well beyond the stage. It permeated all the places he went. Have you ever liked Queen's music? Use the space below to inform us. It would mean a lot if you could subscribe, like, and share this. Furthermore, play the following video that loads. Rest assured, you're going to love it.